Hi there, I'm Matt Gemmell and I'm here to talk about my novel Middleshade Road. Middleshade Road is a horror novel or a supernatural mystery, I suppose you would say, with horror elements. It was started, the planning started a long time ago. The writing process started, I think, after Toll and before Jinx, but I didn't finish it in a single span of time. Set aside the part that I had written and started writing Jinx. So these two books were sort of interleaved in a way, and then it happened again because I went back and I finished Middleshade Road before finishing Jinx. So started, finished. That's how it went. We read the blurbs in these videos, so let's do that. Pale House has awoken. When Dare Lewis receives a call telling him of his estranged mother's death, he must travel back to his childhood home in the far north of Scotland, the sprawling and shadowy Pale House. Drawn into a mystery regarding the circumstances of her passing, Lewis begins to suspect that something is terribly wrong with the house. A secret from the years after he left, and repressed traumatic experiences from earlier in his life, made his former home a place of dread, and now the past has come alive within its walls. As Lewis digs deeper, the house calls out to a damaged and twisted figure bent on murder, drawing a monster into its shifting, labyrinthine expanse. Trapped in a dark and living museum of his own worst memories, Lewis must fight to stay alive long enough to discover the truth about the house at the end of Middleshade Road. There we go. Now that I read that blurb again, I think I wrote it pretty early on. Usually I write the blurbs once at least the first draft of the book is finished, but I feel like I wrote that blurb early on, and yeah, I remember it being a useful tool in a way, like something to inspire and something to write towards. My wife works for Amazon and they have a thing where, as I recall, one of the first things you do when you're just starting a project is that you write the press release for the finished thing. And I mean, it's not just an Amazon thing, it's just generally to focus your attention and figure out what you're going to do and what you want to achieve. And it's an interesting way to look at it. And having the blurb to keep as a kind of guiding star, I suppose. I recall that being useful. So, a horror novel. Where did this come from? What was the inspiration? It's a rather large question, and I find myself feeling some anxiety about talking about this book. But let's do it anyway. In terms of the name, Middleshade Road it's a real road. It's in St Andrews, which is to the quite a bit to the about an hour to the north of Edinburgh, and it's out on the east coast. A beautiful place. St Andrews, of course, being one of the ancient universities of Scotland. Lovely place to visit. Extremely studenty, and my wife and I used to go to this lovely country house hotel out there for anniversaries and things. And when you're driving from that country house hotel into the centre of St Andrews, one of the most convenient ways to do it is to sort of take a wee shortcut along Middleshade Road, and it's nothing like the the streets, the road, I suppose, in the book. The real Middleshade Road is just a lovely little straight, flat, connecting road between two larger thoroughfares, picturesque. It's just whenever the first time was that I drove that route and saw the street sign, just something struck me about it. I just found the name evocative. It had a certain sort of enticing quality, but with mystery, with an edge of darkness about it. Middleshade Road, and just the cadence of it. Middleshade Road. It appealed to me, and I remember thinking as I drew to the end and turned on my left indicator to turn out. I remember thinking that would be an amazing title for a book. And that was before I had any idea of what the book would be or which book idea would be called Middleshade Road. And indeed, it is just the name of the particular road which ultimately leads to Pale House. So it's not like the road itself is a central character. The book is named that rather than Pale House because I just felt it had a little bit more art and intrigue to it. The wee town in the far north of Scotland, Dunleven, in this book does not exist, certainly not the way it's written. It's an amalgamation, of course, of several places. Some of them of the north of Scotland, some of them not. Some from my past, and in terms of living there, and some from just visiting whilst on holiday, etc., etc. You put together pieces in order to create a certain sort of location identity and a certain flavour. And whilst it is fictional, it's very characteristic of small Scottish towns, particularly as you go up into the north, and Dunleven is right up in the Highlands. So that's where that comes from. Pale House, which is the centre of the story and much of its setting, the majority of its setting, and indeed a significant character in the story. It's it of course is not in itself a real place, but it is of course based on a real place from my own past, a particular house, a large house, not as large as the house in the story, mind you, but with that same quality as in the novel of feeling in memory, like it has shifting bounds and uncertain extents and a sort of dreamlike quality of difficulty of pinning it down, because it's less of a physical structure than a sort of compendium of memory, like in the blurb, that dark museum. And that part of the blurb really cuts to the core of what Pale House is. The writing process, as I say, it was a difficult one. It was difficult. Changer, of course, involved an enormous rewrite after almost finishing the first draft. Middleshade Road had no significant rewrite at all, but it was emotionally arduous to write. It's about 90,000 words long, a little over that. So comparable in size to a Kestrel book, a handful of 1,000 words shorter. 90k is getting towards the slightly longer side for a horror novel, and I had no sense of its length whilst I was writing it. It like Pale House, actually, it seemed sort of endless, and the writing process seemed to double back on itself, and sometimes it would seem I was further through and sometimes not. I think when you're extremely close to material, it will always be confusing or even blinding. So I felt like I remember vividly thinking that, in some video games, they have that thing where you need to get through an area which you can't see. Maybe it's in darkness or in that fog or dust cloud or something, and you have to go a certain way by following markers, beacons, like lampposts, whatever it is. And the next is only barely visible when you have reached the prior one. And if you stray from the path, invariably you are thrown back to the start to try again. Pretty common mechanic, and it's also like walking through a park or something at night time, or driving a country road at night time, where there's just these little pools of light where you're going forward almost blindly between them, and then when you reach one, that little miniature world of light is all that you have. And I vividly remember that Middleshade Road, writing it, was like that. I was just in each scene and writing towards, that wall at the end of the scene. And that was all that I could see. It was a claustrophobic, I suppose would be the word. It was a claustrophobic experience and draining. The reason that I didn't write it straight through without going to another project in the middle was because of that, because it was affecting my emotional well-being, I suppose I would have to say. So the flip side of that is that it's an achievement for me to have written it, just in the raw sense of getting through. I talk about the writing process. The structure of Middleshade Road is quite interesting in that the Kestrel books are standard 3-act story structure, which is by no means the only, but the nearly universal story structure. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, certain types of things happen in each. Act 1 and Act 3 tend to be about a quarter of the book each, and Act 2, the middle act, is about 50% of the book, or thereabouts. I also love prologues and epilogues, really like them. They're super useful in techno thrillers, because particularly when weird stuff goes on, because you can use the prologue to perhaps set up things substantially prior to the story that begins in Act 1, Chapter 1, which can be fun. It's used a lot in novels that deal with weird stuff related to historical artifacts or whatever, and invariably you'll have a scene set way back, and then Act 1 starts in the present day. So I love prologues and epilogues, but Middleshade Road issues that structure in a way. You could say that a prologue and 3-act structure and epilogue is kind of like 5 parts, and Middleshade Road does have 5 parts, but not with prologue and epilogue. It has 5 days: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, over which the story takes place. So the parts are 5 in number, and they are days, which is interesting. It's not something that I recall seeing before, but it was something that I did automatically. It was immediately obvious that that's what I wanted to do, just to pull the reader in and ground them in an almost metronomic sort of framework, to try and give a sense of, if not quite inevitability, then of being caught up in events, which is very much what happens to the protagonist, Dare Lewis, Alistair Lewis. You know, Dare is short for one of the shortened versions of Alistair in Scotland. So yeah, that interesting 5-day parts, sort of 5 pseudo acts structure. It was very liberating, because with the delineations being just time based, it became very clear what each part contains, and it actually thus made it, like, strangely paradoxically clear where the dramatic beats would fall. That sort of first half of traditional Act 2, where the plot thickens and deepens, and machinations come into play, and there's setback and all that sort of stuff, very naturally came about as a sort of quieter day in terms of dramatic happenings, but with much more backstory and setup flowing through. So it kind of led me to think that way about stuff I've written since then, including the bulk of Jinx. I think I'd only done the prologue for Jinx before jumping over to complete Middleshade Road. So I'll think about a set of scenes or an act as like a Tuesday of the Monday to Friday span, and things like that. So not something that was planned in advance. It just immediately sort of popped out, and the first sentence of the very beginning, because there's no prologue, the week started badly. I knew that was exactly how it was going to begin. That came super early on as well. The cover, it was also done by Stuart Batch, Bache, at Books Covers, who does all the Kestrel stuff. Here it is. This went through a few revisions. I feel like this came slightly later on in the writing process, but there it is there. I'll put it up so that I don't need to hold it up as ever. There were 2 main variants as concepts to start with, and the initial one, very close to what we ended up with, looks like this. It's essentially, in fact, no, tell a lie, that's not it at all. I'm looking at the wrong one. I'll put the right one up for you, but I was looking wrong. Yeah, there we go. The initial one, as you can see, is pretty close to the final cover. You will notice a few differences if you look carefully. The figure is different. I think it's a sort of hood that's down on his hair, and he is larger because he's closer to the camera, as it were. He's more in the foreground, and I didn't really like the casualness, that sort of leaning off to one side, strolling, the hood down, hands in the pockets. That was not at all what I wanted for the representation of the particular character in the book, who's not the protagonist, by the way. But I loved the overall composition and the colour and the treatment. Loved the title text there, Middleshade Road. Did not like the extreme slenderness of my own name there. It's in the same typeface, I'm pretty sure. Looks the same to me. So we changed that, of course. Came back, there were actually a couple of runs around. We did try a different typeface for the title text, bit more elaborate and spiky and serifed, of course, but that did not really speak to me. It looked visually unbalanced and just wasn't vibing it, really. We did, in that round of revision, come up with what turned out to be the final form for the author's name on the bottom there. Much better, different typeface, can't remember what it is offhand, but it was much more grounded, much more like an underlining. And of course, in this one we've changed the figure further back from the camera. There's that hood up standing there. It's a scene straight out of the book, and there's a real sinister, ominous quality to it. So when you put all those bits together, that's when you get the final one with the initial Middleshade Road title and the revised typeface for the author's name, and of course the much more creepy figure there. And that was the whole process. There was a second concept, which was this one, as part of the initial round, like the first thing I got back. Same building there. It's a castle in Scotland, by the way, and it has a certain quality to it. It was a little bright. It was a little, has a wee bit more of a, maybe a murder mystery-ish feel. I don't know, but it didn't quite hit the genre. I love the look and I love the balance, but it's a cover for a different book, and that's often how you find yourself seeing those things. So Middleshade Road, that's what we got. I just love that that blue sort of, particularly with the trees encroaching in the photography there. There's definitely a strong sense of gathering storm and the fading of the last light of the day and what will night bring. And those windows at the upper right of the building, as you look at it, with light blazing from them, that's not part of the photography. That's added by the designer to reflect certain things in the book as well. So I was really pleased with that. I think it's got a real energy about it. I think that sort of dark, almost metallic blue quality of it allows Middleshade Road, the text, to bounce forward. And of course it's not completely opaque. It's taking on a little bit of the foreground in both senses behind it. But yeah, it has a really genre-aligned feel about it, to me. And I hope you feel that way as well. What Middleshade Road is about, it's about many things. But I think I say something in the acknowledgements about that. Got the book right here. Why shouldn't I just read that to you? Not the whole thing, just a wee extract, I promise. Something about the junk drawer of the mind. Yeah, this book is about memory and how we can simultaneously live inside of it, but also hide things there which end up holding us back. Pale House is, of course, a physical representation of the junk drawer of our minds, complete with poignant objects, tangled and knotted cables, treasures, and a lot of stuff that should probably be taken out, assessed, and thrown away. Opening the drawer often hurts us, but we can't stop reaching towards it. That's, yeah, that's pretty true, he says about something he wrote himself. It is also, of course, about how people process or avoid processing childhood trauma, and how that affects us through our adult lives. In a way, the antagonist is fortunate in that he, in a very real way, gets to confront the traumas of his earlier life that are mentioned in the blurb on the back cover there. The house, slight spoilers here, although it's, you know, it's stated in the blurb, the house takes on a sort of second form, which I always thought of as the true Pale House, you know, the not the real physical one, but the true one beneath the surface that is far larger and has that uncertain geography and that sort of infinite looping around extent, and that is this constant living exhibition of worst memories. That can so often be the case when we have repressed or unprocessed or unhealed childhood traumas. And what I wanted to do with Pale House was to take the figurative aspect out of that and make it a real place. It's interesting. The house that it's based on has that same quality, and as I said earlier, in fact, and I go there all the time. Not in real life, of course. I've not been in years, and I don't expect I'll ever go again. But multiple times per week for 30 years now. In my dreams, I find myself there, and it always has a slightly new form. And there are so many, some recurrent, some dredged up for the first time episodes of parts of the past played out in its rooms in all of these shifting configurations, none of which I can ever escape from until, of course, my mind is good enough to wake me up. When you have nightmares on a chronic basis, sort of 5 to 6 nights per week, every week for 30 years, I wouldn't quite say you get used to it, but your relationship with the whole idea of nightmares and your experience of them in the aftermath changes. Things can become normal by exposure, and you can become accustomed to them, even if they can never be normal in the broader sense. And it's just such a intimately familiar from thousands of nights of experience. A sort of motif for me to be in a place that, in one sense, is under my control and that is my subconscious producing it, but that I am trapped within, compelled to sort of be swirled around in the blender of memory and not the best of memories. I think it's understandable that eventually, if you're expressing yourself artistically via some medium, that's going to come up. So, Middleshade Road, I suppose, was and is an attempt to perhaps to externalize some of it, perhaps to reach for some sort of catharsis, although I think that comes for the character rather than the author, and it's not the same thing, as it turns out, unfortunately. 90,000 words is a lot to write, and the construction of a novel of 90,000 words is a lot to do, not just to tell a story, but as a sort of self-directed therapy, I guess. But when you factor that out over decades, and all of the bad dreams and so forth, you begin to see that actually it's a completely cost-effective, even cheap at the price, attempt to do something. The specific details of the story, of course, are in large parts fictional, which you'll see if you read the book, or if you have read the book, which I hope you will. But there are I've often come back to this concept of the truer truth, in fiction, where the problem with there are kind of two problems with real life when you try to put it into fiction. The big problem is that some of the stuff that happens in real life you wouldn't believe in fiction, not because of fantasticalness, of course, but because of, I guess, the lack of cleanliness of motive and the lack of resolution of outcome and all that. But the biggest problem is that the stuff of real life, because it's so diluted and compromised and grey areaed and so forth, is that it's not satisfying. It's not a matter of belief, but of satisfaction. And narrative has to provide satisfaction. So sometimes you need to shave off certain edges, and sometimes you need to add edges elsewhere. You need to massage and either exaggerate or diminish, often doing both at the same time. And you have to find the version of, not even of events, the events can be totally different, but you need to find a way to express something in narrative form such that it produces the purest and most affecting expression of certain thoughts or feelings in the reader. And I think that is how you can be true to an experience, or to a story that you're using to illustrate an experience, not with factual fidelity, but with fidelity of impact, I suppose, or by transmissibility of impact. And that's the great challenge of fiction, because you're sitting there and you have this idea, and it may be very vague and hard to grasp even for you in your own mind, and you want it to strike a reader in a certain way, and they don't have the same hardware that you do. They don't have the same brain and genetics and whatever the physical components are, and they sure as hell don't have all the same cultural context and the same memories and experiences and likes and dislikes and neuroses and all that stuff. And you're nevertheless trying to sort of plough this path through such that you can express your idea in all these words as a story, and then all these words will be read sometime later by a completely different person through the lens of all that they are, and will produce something comparable as a sensation, as a feeling, as an impact in their mind, which is a ludicrous proposition on the face of it. But books do that every day. It's never exactly the same, of course, because any book is a collaboration between writer and reader. You know, the writer does the first bit, you know, putting it all together, and then you hand it off as words, and the reader takes those words and constructs the story, not just by reading and interpreting the words, but with, I mean, they are getting images and the lens of their own perceptions and memories and personality and all of it. So there's a massive, massive contribution. I mean, surely at least 50% more from the reader. So it can be a hit and miss thing, but I have found, as I say, one of the better ways to do it is to find, in the first place, the truest version of what it is you're trying to express, which will inevitably involve a degree of lying, you know, of exaggeration and of substitution and so on, because you're not trying to just reflect real life. You're trying to make a point about real life, and that needs winnowing and focusing, and it's not something that writers should feel guilty or conflicted about, especially when it's their own stuff that they're talking about in terms of their own personal experiences, etc. And Middleshade Road, of course, is an extremely personal book. Before sitting down to record this, before switching on the microphone, I was anxious, as I said earlier. It's better now that I'm sort of sitting, talking. Of course, as with anything, you get into the flow, and you realise how you're responding, and you can sort of, you know, chart a course from that. But the idea of doing this and talking about this book, even though I'm being quite circumspect, it's been bouncing around in my head for a couple of days, and there's an anxiety about it. The way I think of Middleshade Road is that it was the first big attempt to deal with some stuff via the medium of fiction, in the way that I was able to at the time that I wrote it. And I feel that it is the first of two books, I hope 2 books, not in the sense that we'll see those characters again or see Pale House again. Never say never, but that's not what I mean. I mean that it does one thing, and there's another thing that I need to do with some of that stuff, which would be better attempted in a different story. Because, I mean, it's only been, I can't even remember when it came out, but it's been the last handful of years, 2 or 3, couple of years maybe, 2, 3. When you have a young child, the years really start to blur. The days are long, but the years are short, as they say. But it's very recent, and yet I feel that a lot of time has passed for me in terms of not how I feel about the things which in part inspired Middleshade Road, but it's how I feel within myself. And mostly for the better, I might add. But yes, Middleshade Road is quite a journey. There are things in it that are true, most definitely. There are, of course, many things in it, as I've said, that are just for the purposes of the story. Some of them, it will be clear which category they fall into. Some things it won't be. I don't want to get into a sort of, a point by point list on either side. I think that would detract from the reading experience as well, and it would turn this into a different sort of video, even more so than perhaps it has already wandered. But the relevant thing is that it deals with, in the broader sense, a real thing, and it is that junk drawer of memory that we talked about, and the way that places, when they are associated with trauma, can become antagonists of their own. I suppose we sort of imbue them with characterfulness. Because of the associations we make with them, they can acquire menace or gloom or something, and they change from being places to being backdrops in the dramatic sense. They become this canvas or the page or the projector screen for memory, both factual memory and memory seen through the distortion of the emotions associated with it, which is of course particularly true for childhood. The true Pale House, that dark museum of shifting configuration and so on, the place that in the book that comes from, the place that I cannot seem to stop going back to in my mind so often, including last night. It's been 30 years. It's something that I think we're all at least conceptually aware of, and we've probably had some experience of. I think everyone's had dreams a little bit like that in some way. And it was that facet, I know I keep saying it, but it's so cemented in my mind, the dark museum part of all of this, that is what Middleshade Road, the book, attempts to express. That was the purpose of the story for me, not as a confessional, because again, the bulk of the specific events in detail are fiction, in character somewhat less so, character in the sense of in quality and type. But yes, it was this idea of how the memory of trauma can become, a spider web, a thing that traps and a thing that pulls us back. That's what this is about. Whether it does that effectively is up to yourself, of course. I do hope you'll give it a read if you've been watching these videos because of the Kestrel Techno Thriller series. Of course, this is a wee bit different as a horror novel, but I want you to know that, I desperately love Kestrel and their adventures and their world and those characters. It sounds like I'm going to say but now. I don't want that to be the conjunction. And I love other genres as well. Indeed, back in the time in my life, which a lot of this pertains to, I read a lot. People use reading to escape. God knows I know that, and I read a lot. And what I read and what formed me as a writer was, of course, Stephen King. A lot of his stuff. So many of his books back to back and again, and repeated, all in glorious paperback, of course. This is long before Kindles and so on. Sitting on a train, dark winter nights, going across the city back and forth, and reading all his stuff. And that genre is very much what this is in, and very much why I started writing it, and very much what I love, I would have to say, the most. So you can look at my oeuvre to date in terms of novels and think this is an outlier. But if you look at everything that I've written, including the sort of mini weekly stories, you will see that, in fact, it is the Kestrel series that is the outlier. And this is much more where I live, perhaps inevitably. And you're going to be seeing more in future within the genre. I'm not saying you're going to see more in terms of the actual personal import of this book, but it is hugely significant to me. It is not as popular a book as the Kestrel books, understandably, particularly since there's a genre shift, but it is a book that, with my other books all stacked on my desk here, that my eye will always return to. Not for that beautiful cover, they're all stacked up like this, so I only sort of see the spine. But whenever I notice it and the name comes out, it inspires complex feelings, a lot of feelings. I think, well done for getting through it. I think I'm so gleeful that I wrote a horror novel after wanting to my whole life, and I can't wait to do another. Stay tuned. But the main feeling is the feeling I guess you should have for a horror novel, in that I'm a little bit afraid of it. And that's not some crass marketing, it will terrify you kind of thing. No, it's about, as I know you understand, my own relationship with the book, and the sure knowledge that even if it's not tonight, or maybe even tomorrow night, then it'll sure as hell be the night after I go back there, or to the actual one, not to this lovely castle in Scotland with stock photography and a beautifully produced cover, but to the true original of Pale House, that I will be there again before long. And I've used this word before as well, but there's a talismanic quality thus to this book. I won't deny that a part of me hoped that, not really hoped, had a glimmer of hope that the writing of the thing and the putting it down would be a banishment, like in stories in this genre, where whatever it is trapped in a book then, and it's sealed away and that's it, or trapped in a wee genie's lamp or something. That it would externalize it, and take it out and take it away. Unfortunately, it's not the case, and of course it isn't. It's a laughable idea. Sort of complex PTSD stuff is a good deal more difficult than affording a simple exorcism in 90,000 words. Simple in 90,000 words, there you go. But I'm damn glad that I wrote it, and I love it. I find it very difficult to reread. With the Kestrel books, I periodically not only need to reread bits to get reference and flavour that I'm using in a future instalment or a present instalment. So I'm rereading it from a research point of view or getting back into the tone. But I also just enjoy rereading them, rereading bits and bobs. You know, someone will email me about one of the Kestrel books and mention a certain bit, and I'm like, oh, yeah, before I reply, obviously go and refresh my memory and find myself, honestly, it sounds, again, arrogant or something in my mind. I really don't mean that. But the truth is that I find myself getting caught up in them. I'm not saying they're fantastically well written. I'm not trying to praise myself. I'm just saying that I do find myself getting caught up, and I find it hard to only read a couple of pages of one of them. I find suddenly I've been sitting for half an hour, and it's got to be a good thing, doesn't it? I do find myself getting swept up. It's a fun world, fun pace, and characters I care about. And I think it's a good sign that, as the writer who presumably knows absolutely everything, because I wrote every word of it, that I can still get swept up in it. But that's for the Kestrel books. It's different with Middleshade Road. It's different. There's a very heavy sense of dread that I feel when I dip in any paragraph at all. They're all familiar, of course. And, I had to write it and edit it and proof it and all that stuff, just like the others, but I can dip in at any old point and there's a certain heaviness. And I know that that's just for me. But, I'm a 45-year-old grown man, husband and father of two, one human, one canine. The canine's right here beside me, of course, as usual. And I think it's okay when you get past a certain point to just talk about things like that in an unvarnished way and not dance around it too much. I hope that this video hasn't been too different from the others in a negative way. I'm aware it has, despite initial intentions, had a bit more of a professional quality or a talking therapy kind of quality, but that is just intimately tied up in the genesis and the nature of the book itself. And if you're a writer, if you're thinking about being a writer, the old advice is to write about what you know. And that doesn't just have to be in terms of your characters' location or their jobs or whatever. It can also be, and indeed, probably more importantly, ought to be, about the deeper level of experiences, how they're feeling about things, how they are reacting to things. Not only will there be an indelible and inseparable truth about the stuff you actually know, but there's a hope that even if you don't obtain catharsis from it, you will at least better understand how you feel yourself. I certainly did gain at least that benefit, that forevermore I will be able to see that constant assault of one's own past troubling memories as a contained thing. I like to think of it as this other place, the true Pale House, and I do have to keep going there, seemingly, but I can think of it as a separate place, and it stays there, and sooner or later I'm going to wake up, hopefully without disturbing my lovely long-suffering wife. I've gotten very good at waking up calmly and quietly, sit up on the edge of the bed, hopefully it's summertime, so there's a bit of light around the curtains and the blinds. It's always worse in winter with the darkness when you don't know what hour it is, without like the visual hope of morning, I can wake up and I can think, well, I am back now. The house is there somewhere else and I haven't brought it back with me. That all of those things are encased within. That's the concept that I was struggling to get to there. And that was the, if not the purpose, then certainly the result of having written Middleshade Road for me. I hope you'll give it a try. It's not often that you, as a writer, advise people not to read too much into your your books, because again, a lot of the specific terrible events are genre suited and not historical recollection. Don't want anyone to get too alarmed at certain particular portions of the narrative, but I would say approach it as a genre novel for horror, for supernatural mystery. But I guess now you can't help but keep in mind, in the back of your mind at least, that it comes from a place of truth and that it's an attempt to express a concept and an experience that I think is probably reasonably common in basic identity, if not perhaps, hopefully, in magnitude. I hope you'll give it a go. I know that I will be back there before long, perhaps even tonight. Thank you so much for listening to this. This is quite a personal one, but we like truth and honesty and straightforwardness and the exposure of art, so I offer it to you in that spirit. I hugely enjoy doing these vids. I hope to be doing more in the future. I intend to be doing more in the future. That's more of a positive phrasing, and I do truly appreciate the indulgence of your time watching this and hopefully in reading the book itself. I'll see you next time. Take care.